In the sweltering summer of 1680, the echo of hushed conversations filled the marble halls of Madrid's royal palace, casting a shadow that would linger over the Spanish court for generations to come. Hidden behind ornate doors and beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, a troubling secret thrived, one destined to dismantle the most formidable dynasty Europe had ever witnessed. This isn't merely a chronicle of conflict or upheaval. Instead, it unravels the insidious unraveling of a royal bloodline that claimed divine heritage. What lies ahead will upend your understanding of royal might and expose the profound toll of unchecked power. For over 2 centuries, the Habsburg dynasty ruled Spain, their vast empire sprawling from the Americas to the Philippines, wealth cascading like golden rivers from the New World. Yet by 1680, this once mighty realm teetered on the brink of collapse, eroded not by an external foe, but by an insatiable obsession that would prove more destructive than any invasion. The Spanish Habsburgs had entangled themselves in the very ideology that had secured their reign, ensnared in a self-imposed dilemma where lineage outweighed health and purity eclipsed life itself. Princess Margarita Teresa of Spain, born into opulence and privilege, was meant to shine as a paragon of European nobility, sought after by emperors and kings alike. However, she became a living testament to the tragic missteps of her family. Accounts from the time paint a grim picture of a young woman whose presence repelled those around her, her health so fragile that even the most seasoned courtiers withdrew in horror. Afflicted with a debilitating condition, no amount of perfume, rosewater, or exotic treatments could shield her from the effects of her ailment. Witnesses noted a noxious odor that seemed to rise from her very being, a harbinger of decay and decline. This was not simply an illness. It was the outward sign of a genetic catastrophe, a direct consequence of generations prioritizing political power over biological integrity. Margarita Teresa was not alone in her plight. Her brother, the future King Carlos II, would inherit not only the Spanish crown but a body ravaged by genetic afflictions, rendering him nearly incapable of fulfilling his royal duties. Together, these siblings epitomized the tragic conclusion of one of history's mightiest dynasties, their very existence a stark reminder of the dire consequences of royal inbreeding. The Habsburg family tree had become a tangled web of genetic peril, replete with marriages among cousins, uncles, and nieces, perpetuating a bloodline that grew increasingly corrupted with every generation. What had originally begun as a calculated strategy to maintain political power evolved into a relentless cycle of genetic decay, transforming the royal family into unwitting participants in a doomed experiment. While the pursuit of blood purity was not exclusive to Spain, nowhere else had it been pursued with such relentless fervor. The Spanish Habsburgs pushed the concept to catastrophic extremes, creating a lineage so genetically compromised that it could no longer survive. The year 1680 signaled a watershed moment, not solely for the Spanish royal family but also for the entire notion of dynastic rule across Europe. As Princess Margarita Teresa's health declined and her brother Carlos struggled with the burdens of kingship, foreign courts began to circle like vultures, sensing the impending collapse of Habsburg supremacy. The empire that once instilled fear in its adversaries now evoked pity and barely veiled anticipation. The roots of royal inbreeding can be traced back to the medieval era, when European monarchs realized that strategic unions could consolidate power, forge alliances, and stave off the fragmentation of their realms. Initially, this system thrived, enabling royal families to retain control over vast domains while keeping wealth and influence confined within a tightly knit circle of dynasties. The practice appeared not only logical but also divinely sanctioned, a means to protect the sanctity of royal blood. In this art of matrimonial strategy, the House of Habsburg excelled beyond any other family in European history. Through meticulously arranged marriages, they crafted an empire that traversed continents, commandeering trade routes, colonial territories, and military resources on an unprecedented scale. Their motto, Bella Generali's Felix Austria Nuba, let others wage war. You, happy Austria, marry, reflected their unwavering confidence in matrimony as a weapon of conquest. However, embedded within the Habsburgs' matrimonial scheme lay a fatal flaw that would only reveal itself after generations. As the family's power swelled, their detachment from outside noble lineages deepened. They began to view themselves as inherently superior, convinced that their blood bore unique qualities conducive to rulership. This inflated sense of self-importance led them to progressively limit marriage options within their own clan. The Spanish branch, emerging from Charles V's division of his empire between Spanish and Austrian territories, fixated particularly on preserving blood purity. Unlike their Austrian counterparts who occasionally allied with outsiders, the Spanish Habsburgs regarded any dilution of their bloodline as a betrayal of their divine rights, a decision that would seal their doom. By the mid-17th century, the family trees of the Spanish Habsburgs began to resemble tight loops rather than expansive branches. Cousins frequently wed, systematically erasing the genetic diversity critical for healthy progeny from their lineage. Each succeeding generation saw a rise in birth defects, cognitive impairments, and physical deformities. Yet, instead of discerning these warning signs, the royal family interpreted them as trials of faith, believing they could be vanquished through prayer and medical intervention. The royal physicians, constrained by protocol and fearful of contradicting the prevailing ideology, found themselves in a precarious predicament. They could witness the increasing evidence of genetic deterioration but dared not suggest that the family's marriage practices were to blame. Instead, they resorted to ever more desperate remedies, from bloodletting to importing exotic concoctions, all while the actual cause of the family's plight remained unchallenged. Religious authorities, deeply entwined with Spanish royal power, also contributed to this cycle of destruction. The Catholic Church provided theological rationalizations for the Habsburg marriage customs, asserting that God had selected this family to govern and that maintaining the purity of their lineage was a sacred obligation. Any implication that these unions could harm their bloodline was met with accusations of heresy, silencing the few voices that might have raised a warning. By the early 17th century, foreign diplomats were already taking note of the declining state of the Spanish royal family. Venetian envoys, French courtiers, and English diplomats meticulously documented their observations of the physical and mental degradation visible at the Spanish court. These accounts, preserved in diplomatic archives, provide some of the clearest evidence of the Habsburg genetic crisis. When Princess Margarita Teresa was born in 1651, her arrival was initially heralded as a victory for the Habsburg dynasty. As the daughter of King Philip IV of Spain and his Neriana of Austria, her birth was emblematic of the family's pledge to retain power within their bloodline. Positioned as fourth in line to the Spanish throne, she quickly emerged as one of Europe's most desirable marriage prospects, with her union considered vital for forging essential political alliances. However, it soon became evident that Margarita Teresa was far from the robust and radiant princess the court had anticipated. Accounts from the time describe a child grappling with basic physical development, lacking the vigor expected of royal offspring. As she matured, her condition became increasingly alarming, surfacing in ways that horrified even the most seasoned courtiers. The most troubling aspect of her affliction was the overpowering odor that enveloped her, noted by witnesses as potent enough to be detected from a distance. This was far beyond mere neglect or inadequate care. It was symptomatic of something profoundly wrong within. Court physicians experimented with a range of remedies, but none could conceal the pervasive stench that had come to define the princess. The ramifications for court life were staggering. Gatherings previously featuring her were restructured to minimize her exposure. Diplomatic receptions turned into delicate choreography, with ambassadors strategically positioned to avoid facing her directly, all while maintaining the charade of respect for royal etiquette. The architecture of court ceremonies had to be altered to accommodate this tragic reality. Personal accounts from courtiers and attendants reveal haunting glimpses into Margarita Teresa's day-to-day life. Aware of the impact her condition had on those around her, she became increasingly isolated, withdrawn from the public eye. Instead of being at the heart of Spanish high society, she found herself relegated to the fringes, a painful existence deepening her physical and emotional torment. As was customary for royal offspring, marriage negotiations for Margarita Teresa began early, yet her affliction posed unprecedented challenges for Spanish diplomats. Initial interest from potential suitors, attracted by Spain's political weight, evaporated upon learning of her health issues, placing negotiators in a precarious position attempting to forge beneficial alliances while concealing information destined to come to light. Her younger brother Carlos, born in 1661, would become an even more harrowing illustration of the Habsburg genetic decline. From the moment of his birth, it was evident that Carlos suffered from grave disabilities that would shape every facet of his life. He could not walk until the age of 4, grappled with speech delays, and exhibited cognitive challenges that severely hindered his comprehension of governance. Carlos's physical appearance became a subject of grim fascination and horror across European courts. The notorious Habsburg jaw, an inherited characteristic magnified in successive generations, manifested in Carlos with extreme severity. His jaw protruded to such an extent that closing his mouth was a struggle, complicating both eating and speaking. Contemporary reports described him as possessing an extraordinarily small stature, coupled with an unexpectedly large head, his limbs appearing disjointed and uncoordinated. His health was further compromised by what seemed to be epilepsy, leading to frequent and severe seizures as he aged. Compounding his physical limitations were mental disabilities, resulting in a situation tragic for any individual but particularly devastating for someone in line to preside over a vast empire. Modern medical experts would identify significant cognitive delays, rendering him unable to grasp fundamental concepts of ruling and statecraft. Yet, despite these conspicuous challenges, court protocols mandated that Carlos be groomed for kingship, leading to a bizarrely futile educational endeavor. Tutors struggled to impart lessons in governance to a boy who could scarcely manage personal care, creating an atmosphere of looming despair permeating all aspects of court life. The implications of the royal family's deteriorating condition stretched far beyond personal tragedy. Spain faced mounting threats from rival nations, colonial insurrections, and economic crises, all necessitating decisive leadership and strategic acumen. Instead, the country was poised to be ruled by a king, Philip IV, formed by the very inbreeding that would result in a successor unable to govern effectively. Foreign intelligence agencies began to scrutinize the Spanish succession closely. Acknowledging the likelihood that Carlos would die childless, which could leave a power vacuum altering the European political landscape, diplomats from France, Austria, and England cultivated networks within the Spanish court seeking detailed intel on the king's health and potential heirs. The Spanish court's attempts to address the royal family's health issues exposed the limitations of 17th century medical knowledge and the precarious interplay of politics, religion, and science. The court physicians, armed with the most advanced medical understanding of their time, found themselves utterly unprepared to tackle genetic disorders that would remain largely unrecognized for centuries to come. Their treatments, ranging from bloodletting to exotic herbal concoctions, not only proved ineffective but often exacerbated the patient's conditions. As medical explanations for the royal family's suffering faltered, religious narratives became increasingly vital to rationalizing their afflictions. The Habsburg dynasty. As the physical and mental health of Carlos II continued to deteriorate, the complexity of managing an empire became overwhelming. Key decisions were increasingly relegated to a cadre of nobles and advisors, many of whom exploited the king's frailty to pursue their own ambitions. This power vacuum allowed for factional disputes, with different groups vying for influence and control, further fragmenting the governance of Spain. Publicly, Carlos was celebrated as king, but the facade of royal authority was thin, easily penetrated by the realities of his inadequacies. With state functions diminishing in relevance because of his limitations, traditional displays of power became hollow ceremonials devoid of real governance. The balance of power within the court shifted as military leaders and prominent aristocrats began to operate with more autonomy, often disregarding the formal hierarchy. Foreign perceptions of Spain began to shift dramatically. Once feared as a formidable empire, now Spain was viewed as increasingly vulnerable due to the instability stemming from its leadership crisis. Countries like France and England took note of the weakened Spanish military, their advisors assessing how to capitalize on the opportunities created by the declining Habsburg strength. Merchant interests began to exploit these weaknesses, And soon Spanish merchants struggled as their political infrastructure faltered. The economic ramifications were severe. Spain's colonial possessions grew restless. The loyalty of distant lands depended on solid leadership and consistent policies. With Carlos's incapacity becoming apparent, local administrators in the Americas and the Philippines began to assert greater independence, jeopardizing the cohesion of Spain's colonial empire. This independence fostered an environment ripe for rebellion, setting the stage for what would later lead to the diminishing grasp of Spanish power. Efforts to marry Carlos into another royal family became increasingly desperate, but the cloud of genetic uncertainty loomed large. Ambassadors and diplomats, acutely aware of the dynastic stakes, maneuvered through a treacherous landscape filled with shadows of royal decline. Ultimately, any potential alliances had to contend with the reality that the Habsburg bloodline was critically compromised. The crisis was compounded by the realization that as Carlos aged, the prospects of securing a healthy successor dimmed further. With each passing year, the hope of producing a child who could carry on the lineage waned. The dire implications of this reality reverberated throughout European courts, igniting political calculations about alliances, warfare, and succession that would reshape the continent's landscape. The tragedy of Carlos II mirrored that of his sister, Princess Margarita Teresa. Their tales serve as grim reminders of the catastrophic consequences brought about by generations of inbreeding under the guise of maintaining royal power. While the royal family pushed forward with the hope of rehabilitation through increasingly extravagant medical and ceremonial practices, the underlying biological crisis remained unaddressed. Thus, the stage was set for the inevitable decline of the Spanish Habsburg dynasty. As Carlos II's health began to further deteriorate, leading to his death in 1700, Spain found itself on the cusp of a profound transformation. The death of a monarch unable to govern or produce heirs sparked a major succession crisis. The repercussions of a century-long obsession with genetic purity culminated in a power struggle that revealed the fragility of the Spanish Empire. With the Habsburg influence waning, Europe braced itself for the aftermath of a crumbling dynasty. As Spain faced potential fragmentation, rival nations recognized the opportunity to reshape European power dynamics. In the swirling tides of intrigue and ambition, the legacy of the Habsburg dynasty would be a harrowing tale of grandeur turned to tragedy, illustrating the peril of absolute authority tethered to an inflexible ideology. The results of inbreeding reverberated through history, reminding future generations of the critical need for adaptation and resilience within the web of royal governance. Ultimately, the story of the Spanish Habsburgs echoes as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that the pursuit of purity can lead to decay, and that the very blood that binds a dynasty together can also be the source of its greatest wounds. Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to support our work. Never miss an upload. Like this vid, drop a comment and share it with others to help us grow this historical community.